They plunder, they butcher, they ravish, they make it desert and call it peace.
They told us colonialism was over, yet every headline screams otherwise. Borders are closing, sanctions are spreading, and the same hands that once looted Africa now lecture it about global cooperation. They dress the old chains in new words: security, democracy, reform. But the smell of arrogance hasn't changed. When Barbados' Prime Minister Mia Mottley spoke at the UN, she didn't flatter the powerful, she stripped them bare. Her warning was simple and savage. The world has gone full circle, and the same thieves who once owned us now fear losing control. And how did the world react to this? Let's find out. Mia Mottley's words landed like a hammer on marble. The world worryingly resembles that of 100 years ago. She wasn't wrong. She was polite. Because what she described isn't resemblance, it's resurrection. The empire never died. It just changed uniforms.
On a few tanks. Our world today worryingly resembles the world of 100 years ago. And this has become even more evident with the closing of our borders to both goods and to people.
Today, colonial arrogance doesn't come waving flags. It comes wearing suits, holding passports, and controlling trade. What they once did with gunboats, they now do with algorithms, sanctions, and border policies. And when Mottley said that the world is closing its borders to both goods and people, she was exposing a harsh truth. Globalization was never truly global. It was a private club, and Africa and the Caribbean were never on the guest list. The irony is brutal. The West preaches free trade, but panics when others begin to trade freely. It demands open markets while closing its ports to African exports with 1,000 invisible barriers, quotas, tariffs, and quality standards written to exclude. They once shipped millions of Africans across oceans for free labor. Yet today, they act scandalized when an African dares cross a border to study or seek work. They built entire empires on the movement of stolen people and stolen goods and now pretend that movement is chaos. It's not chaos, it's history catching up. And Mottley, standing there with the calm of a woman who knows her facts and her dignity, reminded them that isolation doesn't create peace, it breeds resentment. When nations shut their borders out of fear, they trap their people in ignorance. When they build walls to keep others out, they only end up fencing themselves in. It's a cycle Africa knows too well. Every civilized blockade ends with the so-called civilized burning in their own fear. The more they close the world, the more the truth leaks through the cracks. They don't fear migrants, they fear mirrors. Because every black hand at their border is a reflection of their own past, the past they refuse to face. What makes her statement even sharper is the timing. This isn't just about Europe or America tightening visas, it's about the spiritual border closing too. The border between humanity and hypocrisy, the border between words and action. The same nations that cry human rights are watching refugees drown at sea. The same governments that condemn xenophobia are weaponizing it in their elections. They will send millions to defend democracy in Ukraine, but won't spend a tenth of that to stop starvation in Sudan. That's not morality, that's market logic dressed as virtue. And here's where Mottley's message cuts deepest. If you close the world to people, you also close it to understanding. The same fear that locks out Africans today is what isolates the entire planet tomorrow. Borders don't protect the powerful. They expose their weakness, their fear of equality. Because if the global system were truly fair, Africa's youth would flood the world not as beggars but as builders. And that's the nightmare the West fears most, an Africa that moves, thinks, and trades freely. Mottley didn't ask the UN to fix that. She asked them to face it. Because once you recognize that border walls are just colonial fences with Wi-Fi, you start to see why instability keeps spreading. It's not because the poor are moving, it's because the powerful are hoarding. The empires are closing their doors because they can hear footsteps, the sound of those they oppressed, finally walking toward them. And if the world is again dividing itself between the privileged and the punished, one island has become the perfect mirror of that injustice: Haiti. Because when borders close, someone always suffocates first, And that's where Motley turned next.
We look forward to the enhanced support of the UN Security Council and the Organization of American States, even as we maintain a strong watch and brief for this valued member of our Caribbean community as CARICOM. Haiti requires, I've said it over and over, a long-term support plan that addresses security and development, not one at the expense of the other. With the requisite political will, the UN Security Council and the international development system are well equipped. They have the resources and power to deliver. We also want to urge dialogue with our friends and partners, especially in the United States, on the inescapable issue on the flow of small arms and light weapons, not only to Haiti, but indeed across this entire hemisphere, especially in the Caribbean with small states. Fragile economies in the democracies of the Caribbean community are now being threatened by this incessant flow of illegally obtained weapons and increasingly organized criminal elements which utilize them. But we will use the systems to deal with them collectively and in accordance with due process. We thank Secretary General Guterres for his unswerving support with respect to Haiti, and we now need others on board to ensure that Haiti can turn the corner and prepare itself for free and fair democratic elections.
When Mia Motley turned from the world's tightening borders to the fate of Haiti, it wasn't a topic shift. It was a continuation of the same indictment. Because Haiti is what happens when the world that preaches freedom refuses to practice it. If closed borders are the walls of hypocrisy, Haiti is the locked room inside, proof that global justice is a performance, not a principle. Motley's voice softened when she spoke of Haiti, but her words cut with surgical precision. Haiti requires long-term support that addresses both security and development, not one at the expense of the other. She was too diplomatic to say it outright, but her meaning was clear. Haiti's suffering is not accidental, it is engineered. 2 centuries ago, Haiti committed the greatest sin a black nation could commit in the eyes of the empire, and it won. It broke its chains, expelled its masters, and declared itself free. In return, the world conspired to destroy it. France demanded reparations for lost slaves. America invaded under the banner of stability. And the UN came decades later to help, leaving behind cholera and corruption. Every intervention promised salvation, and everyone deepened the wound. Motley knew this history because the Caribbean lives in its shadow, small islands watching the global powers experiment on their neighbor and call it assistance. Her demand for long-term support wasn't charity, it was an accusation, because the global institutions, the UN, the IMF, and the OAS, know how to organize summits and sanctions, but never how to build dignity. They deploy soldiers, not teachers. They drop aid, not investment. They write press releases while gangs write laws in Port-au-Prince. Motley's message was simple. Haiti doesn't need rescue, it needs respect. And respect means allowing Haitians to rebuild their country on their own terms, without being treated as a geopolitical orphan. But Motley didn't stop there. She named what many fear to say out loud, that Haiti's instability is being fed by an external bloodstream of violence. We must address the flow of small arms and light weapons, she warned, not only to Haiti, but across the Caribbean. That single sentence tore away the polite curtain of diplomacy. Because those weapons don't appear out of thin air, they are shipped, sold, and sanctioned by the same nations pretending to fight instability. For every illegal gun smuggled into Haiti, there's a legal one leaving a Western factory. For every criminal network in the Caribbean, there's a banker in Miami counting the profit. Her tone wasn't pleading, it was prosecutorial. She reminded the UN that Caribbean democracies, fragile but proud, are being poisoned by the same greed that destabilized Africa decades ago. The same formula, new geography. Haiti is not an isolated failure. It's the test case of whether the world can still punish black self-determination with a straight face. And here's where Motley's brilliance lay. She used Haiti not just to expose hypocrisy, but to warn of its expansion. Because if one Caribbean nation can be starved, invaded, and humiliated for choosing freedom, then none are safe. The disease that started in Haiti will spread across every island and every continent that dares to stand alone. This leads to her next pivot, the nation that has endured that punishment the longest, yet still stands unbroken. If Haiti is the mirror of global betrayal, Cuba is the proof that resistance can survive it. And that's exactly where Motley's fury went next. Let's pause for a second to say, big thank you to the Black Culture Diary community, where Black voices, stories, and legacies are preserved and amplified. By becoming a member, you're not just supporting the channel, you're becoming part of a powerful cultural movement. Let's continue.
Madam President, Cuba has long been a source of support for many across the globe in times of conflict, health crises, and indeed colonial resistance, particularly in Africa. Cuba has paid, however, a high price for insisting on its right to self-determination. And again, yet again, we must be prepared to engage in dialogue in order to stop the disproportionate suffering and the deprivation that is being inflicted on the Cuban society by what is now globally seen to be an unjust embargo and other unilateral coercive measures. Barbados, my friends, reiterates its call for the end of the embargo and the removal of Cuba from the list of state sponsors of terrorism. This is unjust.
If Haiti is the world's mirror, reflecting the cruelty of those who claim to be civilized, then Cuba is the defiance that refuses to fade. That's where Motley turned next, seamlessly, as though she were tracing the same scar that runs across the entire global South. She reminded the world that when others begged for permission, Cuba chose resistance. Cuba, she said, has long been a source of support for many across the globe in times of conflict, health crisis, and indeed colonial resistance. Those weren't empty words. They were a reminder that solidarity has always flowed southward, not north. When the world ignored the dying, Cuba sent doctors. When others sold weapons, Cuba sent healing. And when African nations were still shaking off colonialism, Cuba sent soldiers to help them stay free. Yet, what was the reward for this courage? Sanctions, blockades, and deliberate economic suffocation. For over 6 decades, Cuba has been punished not for aggression, but for dignity. Its crime was refusing to obey. The so-called embargo, a word that sounds technical but means starvation, has turned generations of Cubans into collateral in an ideological war that ended everywhere except in Washington's mind. Motley called it unjust, and she was being diplomatic. The truth is uglier. It is a crime against a nation that never colonized anyone, never bombed anyone, and never enslaved anyone. This is why Motley's defense of Cuba felt bigger than one island. It was a moral litmus test for the entire international order. Because every country that stays silent about Cuba's blockade is announcing to the world that justice is conditional. The message from the West is clear. You can be poor and proud, but not poor and independent. You can resist, but only if your resistance benefits them. Cuba's sin is that it proved a small island could stand tall without Western approval, and that terrifies those who built empires on dependency. But Motley's words went beyond condemnation. They carried a warning. The same system that isolates Cuba today is designing new cages for everyone else tomorrow. The playbook never changes. Isolate, demonize, embargo, destabilize, until a country collapses enough to welcome Western aid with gratitude. Africa has lived this cycle too many times to miss the pattern. The IMF calls it structural adjustment. The Pentagon calls it peacekeeping. The press calls it restoring democracy. But they all mean the same thing, submission by design. What Motley did was connect the dots in public, on record, in the very room where silence is the safest language. She dared to call Cuba's punishment what it truly is, fear disguised as policy. Because the West cannot afford to let the world see that freedom outside its system is possible. And if Cuba, a nation under siege for 60 years, can still educate its children, treat its sick, and stand unbowed, what excuse do the rich have for their own moral bankruptcy? By defending Cuba, Motley wasn't just being a friend. She was issuing a challenge. If small nations can show integrity under pressure, what's stopping the powerful from doing the same? Her speech left the question hanging like smoke in the air. And the answer, unspoken but understood, was fear. Because fear is what drives every empire. Fear of losing control. Fear of truth. Fear of the example Cuba sets. And when fear grows, empires reach for their favorite language, militarization. Which brings us to Motley's final and fiercest warning, that the Caribbean Sea itself is being turned into a new front line by powers who still believe small nations exist to absorb their crossfire. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now.
What is even more, in the Caribbean Sea, we're now seeing a shocking violation of a hemispheric understanding that the Caribbean be treated as a zone of peace. There has been a buildup in military assets in the last few weeks in the Caribbean by both sides, by the United States of America and by Venezuela. We believe that any such buildup could occasion just an accident. And if it does, a simple accident can put the Southern Caribbean at disproportionate risk. I need not tell you, therefore, what a war can do. It is not acceptable for our islands, our countries, to be viewed as collateral damage. I say simply, for all who can hear and for all who read and can listen, full respect for the territorial integrity of each and every state in the Caribbean must be respected.
After defending Cuba, Mia Motley shifted her gaze to the sea, that vast blue witness to centuries of colonial greed. It was as if she was saying, if you want to understand the New World Order, watch the water. Because what once carried slave ships now carries warships, and the waves that once bore chains now echo with the hum of missiles. She warned that there has been a buildup of military assets in the Caribbean by both the United States and Venezuela, a quiet but dangerous rearming of the region. Her message was not about who is right or wrong, it was about who pays the price. And in that moment, the Caribbean was not just geography, it was the stage where the world's hypocrisy performs its encore. The logic of empire is predictable. When they can't control your politics, they surround your borders. When they can't buy your silence, they threaten your peace. Motley knew what the buildup meant. It wasn't about defense, it was about domination disguised as deterrence. The Caribbean, once treated as a sugar plantation for Europe, is now treated as a chessboard for global powers. Only the pieces have changed. The pawns are still small nations, and the kings still move from Washington and Moscow. What she exposed was a truth Africa has lived with for decades. Wars don't always begin where they're fought. They begin in boardrooms where maps are still drawn without the people on them. Her warning wasn't theoretical. She spoke of how a single accident could ignite catastrophe. That's not exaggeration, it's history repeating itself. Every major war in modern times started with a small misunderstanding that powerful nations refused to de-escalate. And once again, the periphery stands to bleed for the center's pride. Motley's voice carried the weight of nations that remember what it means to be used as collateral. She didn't need to name Africa. The parallel was obvious. From Congo's minerals to Libya's oil, the same powers that preach peace have built fortunes on instability. And now, they have turned their eyes back to the Caribbean, the same sea they once sailed to enslave, now being militarized in the name of freedom. But her message went deeper than warning. It was resistance disguised as realism. She declared, full respect for the territorial integrity of every state in the Caribbean must be respected. That statement was not polite, it was revolutionary. Because in a world where might still claims to make right, asserting sovereignty is a radical act. The small island states, often mocked as insignificant, are now drawing moral borders that even superpowers must acknowledge. Motley's words transformed the Caribbean from a backdrop to a protagonist, no longer the playground of empires, but the front line of global justice. And beneath that calm Caribbean rhythm, her speech carried a storm. She was telling the world that the next great conflict won't start with a declaration. It will start with a disregard. Disregard for sovereignty, for history, for truth. The same disregard that once tore Africa apart and now threatens to do the same across the islands. By the time she warned that almost all wars end with dialogue, her meaning was crystal clear. Dialogue should not be the aftermath, it should be the beginning. Because dialogue, in the language of the oppressed, means survival. It means refusing to die quietly in someone else's narrative. Motley's warning was not just for the Caribbean, it was for the entire global South. Because when the Caribbean becomes a battlefield, Africa loses too. Our struggles are not divided by oceans, they are reflections of each other. The same powers testing their warships in Caribbean waters are the ones testing their drones over African skies. And that is why, as her final words echoed through the hall, the speech felt less like a conclusion and more like a call for unity between continents that share not only a past of exploitation, but a future of resistance. The question lingering in the air was unmistakable. If the empire is circling again, will the descendants of the colonized finally circle back together? When Mia Motley finished warning the world about the militarization of the Caribbean, she didn't step back, she stepped forward. Her closing words didn't sound like a plea, they sounded like a prophecy. Because beneath every warning about peace and sovereignty, there was something deeper, a message to the empire itself. Your time is running out. The same nations once dismissed as small are now the moral compass of a world that has lost its direction. From the Caribbean to Africa, leaders are no longer asking for inclusion, they're demanding accountability. And that's what frightened the room that day. Motley wasn't speaking from a position of weakness. She was speaking from history's next chapter, one that no longer centers on Western approval. The logic was simple yet subversive. If the world insists on repeating its old patterns, then small nations will rewrite the pattern itself. The empire is breaking apart, not because its enemies are powerful, but because its lies are exhausted. The moral authority that once made Western nations untouchable has decayed. When Motley spoke, she represented an entire generation of leaders. Traoré in Burkina Faso, Chapo in Mozambique, Ruto in Kenya, and a rising chorus from the global South, all speaking with the same unshakable tone. We will not be governed by your fear anymore. That's the silent revolution unfolding, not through guns or coups, but through dignity. The West calls it populism. It's not. It's post-colonial consciousness, the realization that begging doesn't build nations, and that sovereignty is not granted, it's seized. Motley's Barbados, standing shoulder to shoulder with Haiti and Cuba, is not fighting for dominance, it's fighting for balance. And the more the old powers mock these movements as radical, the clearer it becomes that the radicals are right. She made it clear that true power isn't in numbers or armies, it's in moral clarity. And that's where the West is losing its war. Because the very nations it called Third World now hold the world's conscience. When Africa, the Caribbean, and Latin America start speaking the same language of justice, sovereignty, and peace on their own terms, the old world order begins to shake, not from violence, but from truth. That's what made Motley's conclusion so potent. She wasn't offering a new dream, she was demanding a reckoning. The same sea that once used to transport chains now carries ideas of unity, of equality, of defiance. And ideas, once awakened, cannot be embargoed. Her closing warning was clear without being loud, almost whispered, but heavy with centuries of silence breaking open. Dialogue must not wait for war, because history is patient, but justice isn't. And as her final words faded, the message lingered. The descendants of the colonized are no longer asking to be heard. They are speaking, and the world will have to listen. From that podium in New York, a single island reminded every continent what Africa has been saying all along, that the world can only find peace once it stops pretending some people were born to rule and others were born to obey. And this time, no empire, no embargo, and no army can stop that truth from reaching shore. If the world has truly moved on from empire, why does it still act like one? When small nations speak the truth, why do the powerful suddenly go deaf? Let us know in the comments section. If Africa and the Caribbean are finally standing up, who's really trembling now? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. we have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.